Welcome to the Cloud Podcast. I'm your host, Gideon Sutherland. Here at the Cloud, we like bringing the testimony of the saints past and present so that you can run the race with faith and endurance.
Hey, today we are going to be talking about our usual host, Gideon Sutherland, and I'm joined today by Michael Rogers.
Yo.
And I myself and Benjamin Brewster. I got to talk a bit last podcast, but today we wanted to hear the story of our host and see kind of where he's coming from and why he's doing this podcast maybe, and get to hear some insights. So, Gideon, where would you start everything off?
That's an interesting question. I guess you start from the beginning.
As all good things do.
As all good things do. That would be Louisville, Kentucky for me. So I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. I lived there for about 3 years before moving to New Jersey, near Toms River, New Jersey, Lakewood, New Jersey. And then I've lived all over though. I've lived in Houston. I've lived in northern Kentucky also. I've lived in Memphis, Tennessee, and now I'm here in Springfield, Missouri. But I think that amount of travel has really shaped me a lot.
Yeah. I mean, from my understanding, you have a pretty unique faith background. And how do you think traveling all over kind of impacted that, and like living in those different places?
Yeah. So, add some context to that, my mother grew up classically, what I would say, Holiness Pentecostal AG. Relatively, they were part of what would be like the earliest forms of like a non-denominationalism at that point in time.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the like early covenant movements, if anybody knows what that is, which there's a lot of problems there, but but not with any necessarily distinctive theological things, but and then my father grew up Southern Baptist, so I'm the product of charismatic, and he didn't just grow up any type of Southern Baptist. When he really came to faith, he was he came to faith because of the Reform movement, the young restless and Reform movement of the late '90s, early 2000s, and so I'm the product of a roaring Pentecostal woman who loves to speak in tongues, and a hardcore Reformed guy, which is an interesting combo. And
One side would have you believe they're like bitter theological rivals.
Not at all, though.
I know, it's so funny, but like in the AG mind, it's like, you Baptist and AG, they're so different. They can't coexist.
But they're not at all, which is really funny. I mean, especially since my dad's what would you call like a continuationist also when it comes to the charismatic gifts. So that was never an issue for him. He was never part of a cessationist understanding of the biblical text. So that was helpful. But I mean, growing up, I don't particularly remember the first churches we were a part of. I know we were part of a church plant when I was a baby. And then when we moved to New Jersey, we were part of a Calvary Chapel church, which is generally more charismatic. But it depends. There's a big emphasis on the global church with the Calvary Chapel churches, which is particularly interesting because they're a newer denomination from the 1960s, and they really don't have what I would say. Like they have such their overlay in missions with other different Protestant organizations is really interesting with just how they are like church polity wise. But that was my dad sort of talks about Calvary Chapel was almost being a settling ground for those 4 years because there's really no great churches up in the Northeast.
Yeah,
it wasn't for a lack of his it wasn't for his by his choice that we went to the Calvary Chapel Church, which he did actually become an elder at for a few years. But it was because there was not really any.
There's just not that many churches up
consistently biblically grounded churches, especially from like what I would say a low church Protestant perspective. I mean, of course, you have like a big Catholic presence up in the Northeast,
Right.
especially in New Jersey, which is primarily Italian and things like that, and big Italian base.
The movies were right.
Yeah, I mean the majority of the people that we the majority of the people that I interacted with at my Calvary Chapel Church were actually of Italian descent as well. So it's really interesting.
Wow.
That's crazy, Mike. You spent one summer there, and now you get to be racist.
Hey! I heard people talk like that. That's not racism. I'm just doing an impression.
Yeah, that's true. If his stereotype is correct, you know.
And it's really just funny. That's what it is. It's not. Anyways, keep going.
And then we moved to Houston, Texas when I was about 7 years old, and we were part of a church. It's not a church plant when we got there. It was established for a few years at that point in time.
Now, as I understand, Houston was your least favorite move. Is that correct?
Good question.
Good question. Least favorite move, definitely not. I guess my least favorite move would be New Jersey, technically.
Fair enough.
If we had to rank them.
Here's the Italians. Gid's also racist.
I mean, I don't know. Houston's probably up there, pretty high, to
Nice.
say the least.
Nice. So S tier, Houston, D tier, New Jersey, and everything else.
Well,
fits in
it
between.
costs so much to live in New Jersey. Not like I was paying any of it. I was
Right.
4.
right.
But like if your parents are telling you at the age of 4 that it costs a lot to live in an area, then it costs a lot to live in that area.
Dude, 4-year-old Gideon's like, dang, this milk is expensive.
Yeah, and this is back in 2008, so it's like
This milk is
High-
$4.
Stick to Italians.
height of the
Shut up.
height of the the economy just crashed at that point in time.
Oh shoot, yeah.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about that. Yeah, dude.
I don't blame you for forgetting you were 4 also.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's true.
Hey, gotta watch what's the big movie? The Big
Oh,
Short.
Big Short.
Big
Bro,
Short.
Actually, very good movie.
But no, we moved to Houston. We were part of a church called funny enough, Covenant also. No relation. It's just there's amongst reformed churches. This was the first Reformed church we attended. It was part of the Acts 29 Church Network, which was
It's not a denomination, but
Not-
it is a denomination.
it's not a denomination, but is a network. You know,
We're not a denomination. We're like a
We just, like,
group of churches with some
similar
leadership,
values.
sort of.
You know, and we pay tithe. You know, like there's
Yeah.
there's a fee.
But don't you dare say that dirty denomination word.
But that was really like the beginning of, I guess, more intentional. I mean, there's only so much before you gain consciousness, you know, before the age of 6.
Oh yeah. I thought you were talking about like the Acts 29
No.
church network.
No, I was talking. Covenant specifically is where a lot of the foundations were laid for my own personal faith. I love those elders deeply. Pastor Tim Ganger, Pastor Daniel Davis, amongst others, were really, 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 really influential in my faith walk and just my building up as a man. And then about, I guess it would be 2015, at that point in time, we decided to go plant another church in Alvin, Texas. And we moved to Alvin, Texas, which is about 20 minutes from Pearland, which is where we were living previously. And that was an SBC church. So the previous church was technically non-denominational, what I would consider like a classically more like, it was Reformed Baptist, but you also definitely had some Presbyterian families in the family. It was a generally Reformed church with very acoustic-like, general like small form liturgy is how I would describe it. And then City View Alvin was definitely more of a SBC church, even though I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know that I was technically a Baptist for 4 years.
Bro, that's so real though. You really like when you're growing up, you really don't know what denomination you are. Like, I just go to church. Like,
Yeah. And that's where some other great men really influenced my life. Jeremy De La Porte, Carrie Perrin, amongst others. Scott Foster was consistent. He went and helped plant our church. He's like an uncle to me. And And so this is really where like the basis and like really where I was challenged a lot, because at that point in time I'm going into middle school.
Ooh, dog days.
Dog days, you know. And I remember specifically one youth evening. So our head pastor was leading our youth, because we're a small church plant at the time of about 40 people.
Oh,
and
wow. So how big is the youth group?
2 people.
Yeah.
I never really had a youth group, so except for my senior year of high school. We were sitting around a fire. It was actually a chilly day for Texas, which is shocking.
Yeah, what a cold 70 degrees.
And he had one of his Bibles that he's had his entire ministry, like very, very nice golden Bible. And like, it was really cool, really good, tons of notes. He showed us all through the paper. And then he started...
Us 2 people.
Yeah, us 2 people. And he started asking us questions. He's like, okay, we're gonna... And he didn't tell us the specifics of the exercise we were about to do. And he's like, I want you to name me one verse in the book of the Bible that I'm about to name, or like a story, and you can tell me like the story, right? And so we started going through the first few books, of course, Genesis, Exodus. So
wait, was the exercise like he's giving you a book and you're like, oh, there's a story in there?
Yeah.
Okay, so like general like survey of the Bible. How much do you know about what's in the Bible?
Yeah. And so I think we got to... What was the first one? I think we got the first book that we got to that we didn't really know anything specific was like Chronicles, one of the Chronicles, because
Y'all made it farther than I probably could have at that age.
Fair enough.
and
Would have been stuck at like Deuteronomy.
maybe Joshua. Yeah, it might have been Deuteronomy. That sounds right. He rips that entire book out of the Bible. There's a fire, and he tosses it into the fire.
What?
Yeah.
What?
And we went on to the next book, and I think by the end of that, the Bible's less than half full, I think.
Oh
and
my gosh!
And he looked at
what
us.
Imagery.
And he looked at us. And he turns out, this is the Bible you know. So that was like a really big like turning point.
Dude, that's nuts.
So you notice that like one of the big things is like people like to say I'm a walking biblical encyclopedia. I have verses that come off. That's one of the big reasons.
Yeah.
Now I still struggle with the minor prophets. I probably still have some of the minor prophet stuff ripped straight out of there.
Don't we all, bro? Holy Lord. I don't even think I've read Zephaniah yet.
It's like the best one.
Shut up.
The best one's definitely Hosea.
Right, yeah. Yeah. You want to define best real quick?
I'm a Jonah
Best.
guy.
Big Jonah. Yeah.
That's fair.
Boom shakalaka.
Well, my favorite's Obadiah because
One chapter long? Whatever, man.
it's 2 actually. Pretty sure.
Yeah, I think Obadiah's too.
Get wrecked.
I could be wrong. I could be sounding like a complete idiot right
He's
now.
gonna go find a Bible and verify whether or not this is true. But keep talking.
And then 8th grade, summer going into my freshman year of high school, we moved again.
Oh wow.
We moved to Cincinnati area, and we were trying out churches there for a long time, and we were in between another Acts 29. Well, they're both Acts 29 churches actually, but one was officially a part of the PCA, Presbyterian Church.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
A denominational plus network church.
Yeah, and then the other was I don't know if they were officially SBC or if they were a non-denominational church. It's called Missio Dei, and I remember.
Frick, is it only one?
It's one.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, there's only
No,
one.
it's close to 2.
Shame on us.
21 chapters. 21 verses.
Oh, 21, yeah.
21 verses.
Yeah, I would have just been so
Close to-
incredibly
close to 10.
baffled if Obadiah was like 21 chapters.
Yeah, that'd be sort of crazy. It wouldn't be a minor prophet at that point in
No,
time.
bro, that guy would be a big boy.
See,
I mean-
the reason I know it's 1 is because when my parents told me to go read a book of the Bible, I would go read the 1 or 3 chapter books, so I know most
Oh
of them.
my gosh, shame on you.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't feel bad that I didn't know that
So
it was
like
one.
Obadiah, I know where Jude's at. I know where Philemon's at.
Dude.
Do you know where 3rd John is?
I know where 2nd and 3rd John.
Second.
Oh, hey, I read a book of the Bible, Mom. Oh, good job. Ooh, yes.
You're cringe.
That's crazy. Yeah, so we were going between this really, I mean, both were in downtown Cincinnati, and they were in like these. One was in an art. Missio Dei was in an art studio.
Really?
Yeah, so it was really cool. It was a beautiful, beautiful church in this art studio downtown. And then the other one was in like this classical church with beautiful like stained glass windows. And,
Wow.
And the Presbyterian church is we fell in love with. All right, let me rephrase that. My siblings and I and my mom fell in love with the Presbyterian
Really?
church.
Your dad wasn't on board with the Presbyterian church?
He's a Reformed Baptist at heart, and there are just it was being at that Presbyterian church. It was like one of the first times I saw the church as like what it will be in heaven. It was really interesting.
That's a baller, like. Yeah.
Because, and I mean that in every tribe, every tongue, every nation, every people. There was young, there was old, there was black, white, Asian. It doesn't matter. So many.
All three.
All three. Not just that. That was there was an ellipses. There was an ellipses. There was an ellipses at the end of that. You just couldn't. You can't.
Right. Subtitles aren't on.
We
in
need
real life,
we need like a word for ellipses that's not ellipses that you just like a statement that like implies more.
At all.
etc.
At all, etc.
Yeah, but I feel like etc. is like kind of derogatory to any of the things you didn't mention.
They're not worth mentioning.
Yeah.
It was just a community.
That's a cool church environment.
It was a really cool church environment. The pastors were really great, and I think it was really weird. I don't know how this decision like act because like everybody's like my dad even says like we'll go where like the whole family wants to go, and then we just somehow like it wasn't that Missio Dei was bad. We love those people. We have great relationships there, but it was also one of those churches where I was like the only teen other than the pastor's son, and so it was actually really if I was
Pastor's kids.
if I was like in Cincinnati now, there's a high chance that I would be going to that church because that church actually was primarily like college age. Like young, so like it was just like a little gap. So they had young people, so they had little kids.
Okay,
they had little kids and middle schoolers that were like fresh middle schoolers from like all the 30-year-olds that like planted the church and stuff.
From the 30-year-olds, yes.
And then you had like a big college age group.
Okay, I was under the impression that it was like you and a bunch of old geezers. Like okay, so I could see how the gap is kind of awkward though as like a high schooler.
Yeah, it was a little weird because you're not interacting with like the college people, especially not as like a 14-year-old.
Right.
And then sophomore year, COVID hits, and everything gets destroyed, and no church. We watched Southeast Online for a lot of COVID.
Really? Wow.
Kyle Alderman's a really good teacher. That's a big plug. I don't really use the respect mega churches or their leadership, but Kyle Alderman's a good teacher.
Fair enough.
It's
It's
just the reality. I'm just gonna be
honestly,
honest.
Yeah, I feel you, man.
And then going into my senior year, we moved again to Memphis, Tennessee. And we were part of the Refuge Church, which is still some of the most impactful pastors that I've ever sat under.
So, question, like, you moved a lot and you changed a lot of churches. Like, I kind of have like a two-part question. So, like, A, did you know that you were going to be moving that much? Like, was this like kind of, like, were you kind of anticipating it by like the third or fourth? And then B, like, how does that affect like how you connect with a church? Like, because I know like military kids kind of go through this kind of thing where they don't like the way that they connect in spaces is different because they kind of anticipate being uprooted all the time. So like, what did that do like to the way you interact with church?
Yeah, it was never necessarily an expectation of moving each time pretty consistently outside of Houston. Because we were in Houston for 7 years, but we were in two different cities within Houston and two different churches. Pretty consistently, like it was never like the expectation. I remember my dad got the job in Cincinnati. We thought this was going to be the last job.
Oh,
And
okay. So
then-
it's always like this. No, this is the last one for real.
And then it wasn't bad. And my dad, if we were to ask my dad today what like he would want, he'd probably say would love to have stayed and just ridden that out and lived the rest of my life up in Cincinnati. But I mean, there was doors open because we moved to Memphis. Like my sister got state of the art life changing care. She had what would have been open heart surgery. They were able to do through her leg and replace an entire valve.
What?
They were able to replace a valve with a particular machine, and the surgery was actually done by the surgeon that worked on her the day she was born.
Whoa!
Yeah. So there's like God was moving, but that year was probably one of the toughest years of my dad's life. And so they got out of there like the year after I went to college, pretty fast.
Right.
But I mean, the church there and the youth group community was great. I mean, how it impacts plugging with church, it never really impacted me because I moved around so long, and the people I interacted with, like I was always ready to plug in. We were very proactive in like service at our churches, so I was never really guarded with it. Now how it affects my sisters is a completely different story.
Right.
So Maya, who's my younger sister who had the surgery, at their most recent church, she's definitely been much more withdrawn because she just doesn't trust that they're not going to move again.
That's hard. Yeah.
And that's really hard. And they won't move again. They'll be in Houston. Doesn't necessarily mean my dad will be at whatever particular job he is for the entire time there, but I highly doubt that they will leave the Houston area.
So like the like experience of constantly moving kind of just made you really proactive about like seeking out.
Yeah,
speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I've never really been like. I think the bigger impact that I had, like the bigger impact is a lot of the churches that we attended never had kids that were my age. And so I was constantly talking with adults, and so even like getting to like college, when you're talking with a 30-year-old, what is acceptable and like how they understand tone and things is completely different than interaction with people your own age.
1,000,000%.
And so now stuff's just starting to make a little bit more sense, is they're able to decipher what you actually mean rather than how you sound. And so I struggled with those connections because I was constantly surrounded with people who were theologically knowledgeable and knew more than me, but also could understand my like intent and statements. So that was a big part of my learning curve coming to universities, because you lose the understanding of the intent, and then also I became pretty much de facto one of the more knowledgeable people in the area.
That's a super interesting tidbit, because like that contextualizes like so much of like our freshman year experience. Because like, yeah, no, that's so true. Like as you get older, like you're more like, even I'm kind of like noticing this even in myself right now, where it's like you slowly become more able to be like, oh, they're just feeling some type of way about this, but like they probably don't actually like intend it to come across like this. They're probably just like that's super interesting though. Like the way that interplays with like your tonal stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, so because I didn't have those like contemporaries to sort of balance me like at all. I mean, like the first time that I had it, I guess, would be my senior year when we moved to Memphis, because we had a really great youth group. Paul Dacus was our youth pastor, and he's a phenomenal man.
When you first said that, I thought you were just like, yeah, our youth group. His name was Paul.
Our youth group's name was Paul. That'd be really
another two-guy situation. Like,
but I mean, even there, like, I was the only senior in that youth group, and I was going to be gone like the next year. Everybody knew, so I got there, and it wasn't like I had great relationships there. But again, like the people who were my contemporaries and I was having conversations with were the adults.
interesting.
So not the juniors and sophomores who were beneath me. It was my youth pastor, who was in his 30s, and all the guys who help out, who were the dads of these high schoolers who were also in their 30s. Um, and so like that year really like sort of not hardened me like spiritually, but like sharpened me for what I was about to come into. So like all the like answers that I had.
So
Yeah.
so coming into college with that switch from maybe receiving a lot, especially from the people who are above you, to now all of a sudden there's a lot of people below you who don't know as much as you do. And I think that's pretty fair to say. Even generally now, there's I mean most people on campus don't know as much as you do, especially about the Bible and these topics that we like to discuss. What was it like going from receiving all this knowledge to trying to give it? How'd that transition go?
Well, I mean, so there's two like factors. One, grew up in a completely reformed context. I mean, I was continuationist in my understanding of the charismata, but outside of that, I would have been what I would consider a pretty reformed Baptist. Now, there were certain things that I would like understand today that I would have held but didn't know about, like a more like distinct understanding of like covenantal understandings and things like that a lot of Reformed Baptists hold to also. But I was entering, with that being said, I was entering into a primarily dispensational Pentecostal circle, and I was also very, and I still am, complementarian at that point in time. So I was very complimentary.
Much to the chagrin of people here.
Yeah.
You hate women.
It's like, no, I don't. Please.
So funny, man.
And so I was very complementarian. I was very reformed, and on this campus, predestination is a naughty word.
That's scary.
And because of like all the other things, I was very abrasive. So there's a lot of growing, and I burned so many bridges that freshman year, and people's perspectives on me were really formed by my almost naivety in like how people can respond to particular forms of disagreement. Because I never meant for anyone to feel stupid, or for anyone to not be edified, or for anyone to think that I was arrogant or anything like that. But in my own, like how my openness in like confrontation and conversations that I can have with people who are above me is not something that you can necessarily have with people who view you as a peer and an equal. And so being able to understand how to guard that, not only guard that side of me, but also just be like, what conversations are worth having, and if they are worth having, rather than almost lead the conversation with leading questions rather than with particular statements of right and wrong, is something that has changed. And I'm always still very straightforward, very blunt, and I don't yield, but because of the implications and the impressions of the first year on campus, people engage these conversations with me differently, even though I'm very different, you know.
Do you think there was any learning curve as to who you're talking to and how to change maybe your intonation or how you might word things with certain people? Because I remember coming in, you were I mean, you were who you were. You were face value with everybody. I mean, and I know like talking with you sometimes can be like talking to like almost a brick wall, because you have answers for a lot of things that people haven't even thought about. And that's not necessarily like a bad thing, but I know for some people, when faced with a brick wall, they can sometimes it makes them cowering and defensive.
Face into
yeah, I mean, that's one way of putting it. But yeah, was there any like learning curve to how you dealt with some of the people here on campus, or maybe delt's a bad word?
I think dealt. These ruffians need to be dealt with.
How did you smite them? How did you put them in?
These dang dispensationals. Wild. I think the biggest change in how I interacted with people really came over the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I would say. Because one, I was, how do I say this rightly? One, I was presenting the gospel to children, and children don't know anything. And,
No, it's true. Hey, no, that's yeah.
And God really revealed, one, what matters in the presentation of the gospel and unity of Christian thought, and two, also the grace to be able to listen to stupid questions and give good answers that are edifying. You know, I remember one kid, I was telling a story about Moses.
Okay. Yeah.
And you could go on to and I was telling them I was trying to explain the glory of God to them. And so I was like, the glory of God would have killed Moses. So I told them the story about when Moses saw God on the mountain, and he saw his good side, and how he glowed for a long time after that. And one of the kids, I remember distinctly, was like, "That's so cool. I want to glow like Moses."
Oh, I thought you were gonna. Okay, when you started this, you were like, I had to respond to so many dumb questions. I was like so prepared for like a dumb question, but that's a pretty cool response.
Yeah. Well, it was led by a dumb, I was explaining, it's a little kid question, and then you get to tell a story and reference, and then I get to tell that at the end of each day we did give highlights, and that was one of the highlights, and so everybody loved it, and one of the workers. And this leads me into my second point is I was working with people who also didn't necessarily agree with me about everything and know about everything, but she just comes up to me and she's like, "I've never heard that story before from the Bible." And my gut reaction is like, "How?"
Someone doesn't read their Bible. Yeah.
But my gracious how the Holy Spirit
empowers you to,
and not even just empowered me, like the grace that of that moment was let's glow like Moses together, right? And ultimately, that's sort of like the shift, I think, that was amongst other things, like theological changes, that was greatest in my dealing with other people, is ultimately I want to glow with the presence of God with my brothers and sisters in Christ. And there's ways that we can achieve that in community. And sometimes you need to be really firm. And then other times you can just tell a Bible story almost, you know?
No, I definitely remember coming back from that summer. And I know for sure you had changed because when I asked questions, you weren't so direct in all of your answers as you were before, but also you had started looking, that was when maybe you started looking at other...
Oh, I mean, so we can get into this. So the
can of worms opened.
So throughout this entire process, my mom's Pentecostal, my dad's Reformed. I grew up Reformed. I came into campus very Reformed. I was going
very true.
Very Reformed. I loved talking about Romans 8 and 9.
Oh my god!
Just classical pop Calvinism.
Ad nauseum? Question mark?
Without any of the beauty and the nuance of the other perspectives.
Mike and I loved Hebrews. Was it 6? I think we loved Hebrews 6.
Yeah, that was oh Lord, it was. Anyways, no, keep going.
Bro, the Reformed response to Hebrews 6 is one of the funniest things ever. Just because it says you can doesn't mean you will, baby. But I think so. For context, my senior year of high school, I was working at McDonald's, and our McDonald's was really relaxed with what they had allowed us to do while we were on shift. I mean, I remember I watched an entire half of One Piece while working at McDonald's.
Oh my! So, Just for those who like don't have context, One Piece is an anime that's like what? It's got like it's still going. It's been going since like
over
the
1,100
90s.
episodes.
That's insane. That's 500 episodes of anime with like 20 minutes of content.
Yeah, the
plus an
20,
intro and
22,
an outro.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
I'd skip the intro and the
absurd.
outro. So it was about 18 minutes of total content.
That's like 50 times 20. You're the mathematician, dude. No, 500 times 20.
It's 20,000.
That's a lot. Okay, anyways.
But I mean, I would do other things also. And I would watch a lot of YouTube videos. At that point in time, I was really into a lot of apologetics YouTube videos and things like that. And I stumbled upon. It was during the summer, so it was after a break, and I stumbled upon a YouTube video. There's two YouTube videos that I remember distinctly, and one was between Francis Chan, who you may know of, Hank Hanegraaff, and KP Yohannan, and so it was a roundtable discussion, and so KP is. I don't exactly know what denomination KP is.
Me neither.
But he's the head of the Gospel for Asia missions board.
Okay, yes, you told me about this.
And so, whatever your thoughts about KP is, there's a lot of opinions. This interview was really good from them. And then Hank Hanegraaff is Bible Answer Man. He was evangelical for 60 years. He was on the radio, still is. But he converted in like 2017 to Eastern Orthodoxy. And so the reason I say I don't know what denomination is because a lot of evangelicals work with KP, like Gospel for Asia, but the way he talks is it seems very Oriental Orthodox.
Wow.
But I'm not certain, so I won't make a direct statement. And Francis Chan, and they were just sitting. It was a roundtable discussion about the Eucharist.
Okay.
And at that point in time, I was like, Eucharist, freaking Catholic.
That's a silly word for something I don't believe in.
Yeah, it's communion. We give normal communion, and I was lucky to grow up in churches that did communion weekly. I don't think I have ever been a part of a church that hasn't done communion weekly and with wine.
But yours was with wine growing up?
Yeah.
Wow.
Dude, once a month grape juice sucks. Keep going.
Yeah. So I was, and I think part of that is because, especially in like the Reformed tradition, there's a lot of congregations that are both Presby and Baptist like, and Covenant was one of those places. Right. So I don't necessarily remember. I mean, I was in kids' church when we were at the Calvary Chapel Church, so I don't particularly remember if they did it weekly, but I do know starting at Covenant, and then one of the big things is like every single planting family with Carrie like pushed for weekly communion. And Carrie's a big proponent of it also. So that was never like an issue. And I recognized the importance of it. And in about, I don't know, probably about 2 to 3 months prior, I was taking communion. And what I'd been doing is I'd get the communion, because at that point it's still pouches, it's like normal. I think we might have been transitioning back to normal communion. And I'd take it and I'd quickly leave the sanctuary and go to the restroom, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't serious. And my dad stopped me one day and is like, you're like remembering the death and burial of, like, you need to stop and you need to pause and you need to take this with weight. And that's probably one of the biggest like impact moments. And then pair this a few months later, and this is like almost shows like the work that the Holy Spirit was doing in reference to this. I watched this video, and it's with all these Orthodox guys and Francis Chan, who I deeply respected at the time. I still do. Still do.
Yeah, okay, nice.
And they're talking about like the real presence of Christ. And it's like the first time I had ever heard this. I mean, I'd heard in passing that Catholics believe
they believe they're munching on the flesh of
And
Jesus.
you're like, that's sort of weird.
Yeah.
But like the articulation of like Hank Hanegraaff and there's other topics that they talked about, but I distinctly remember like their conversations on the Eucharist and the Real Presence. And Francis Chan has since now holds to a Real Presence view, and that just sort of started a little like tour because I was like, of course I'm not gonna become a Catholic. There's no way,
Bro.
No.
This when I like our freshman year, I remember being like I remember like talking to you about this and being like, bro, do you hate Catholics? And you're like, well, no, I just really disagree with them because I was like, I just remember like the way that you would talk about like some of the beliefs. I was like, there's no way he's never gonna do it. And then
yeah. So and then, well, I'm not Catholic.
No, you're not. You're diet Catholic. I'm kidding.
We'll see what happens.
So am I.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. And I watched. Then I remember watching another video, and so I started looking at orthodoxy, and this is when I'm still super reformed. And this is
you did start off this way first.
You started with orthodoxy instead of Catholicism.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and so this was coming into my freshman year. This was prior. And I remember watching a video one night in the window, and it's the working nights at McDonald's, some of the funniest stories ever. And I watched a video from a Protestant who was visiting Orthodox church with an Orthodox priest. He's a big Protestant YouTuber. He visits a myriad of churches, and I was like, whoa, this is intriguing. And so I looked into St. Thomas Orthodox Church, and I was about like, I was so close to sending an email, reaching out, telling the priest there that I was coming and like getting interested. And this was before coming.
Like in spring, or
yes,
yeah,
my
wow.
parents did not know this at all. But I was like, really, like, this is really, really, really intriguing. And that's sort of what started it. And then over the following year, I'd looked into more stuff. I was arguing with Catholics all the time on Instagram and stuff like that. And I don't know specifically what did it. Well, actually, I do. Yeah. I have a moment that like everything came to line, but like when we're talking about like things that like convinced me of particular theological perspectives, I don't really know how I came to like 100% the conclusions of like the Eucharist or anything like that. There's no particular argument that was like, did me in.
It happens over time. I feel like, you know.
Well, no, but like there's particular things like I was like really interested and sort of on board from like a testimonial perspective, let alone, which is dangerous. Don't do that. Look into biblical reasoning. And I mean, it grew from there. I would start looking into things, and I remember our RD was Anglican, and and I asked him where he'd go to church, and he said, at this point I was going to Reformed Baptist Church, and I was still very Reformed. I was still very Baptist. Of course, baptism doesn't save, you know, and it's only for adults. And I think there's a few instances there that really challenged me. I started looking into covenantal understandings of just Christianity in general. I'd say is like the understanding of the covenants in the context of these things. And I remember I started assenting to a Real Presence view probably around January or February of my freshman year of college, and I would go. It's like, I don't know, I can't explain it, but I believe that you're here when I take this bread and this wine, Lord, at my good old SBC church. And now, is there problems with that understanding of it, potentially, with how you understand consecration and apostolic succession. But it was still a process. And then Easter Vigil came around, and that Saturday was the first ever Anglican service that I ever attended. And
That's a baller service to do it on.
it was, and I remember feeling after the service, it was like, when you have that, the actual Eucharist, and just feeling alive. And I'd felt like the Holy Spirit comfort me in the presence of God before, but I had never felt, like, I just felt generally alive. And my mind really did go to John 6:53.
Right.
So he's like, those who eat my flesh and drink my blood will have life. Right? And I just, like, it wasn't a feeling, it wasn't like this super emotional experience, but I just felt alive, and I never looked back. I never, and this was like, I was pursuing membership at Redeemer. I was like literally one step away from being a full member. They had taken me to conferences. I was going to conferences. They were going to start training me to do preaching with them. I probably would have preached multiple times in Big Boy Church already by now if I'd stayed there. But there was just something about it, and it all started clicking. I mean, I started my questions, and some of those, like, some of the more nuanced perspectives would develop over my sophomore year particularly. Lots of videos. I was watching a lot of Catholic stuff my sophomore year, because some of my biggest issues with Catholicism just evaporated instantly. Well, not instantly. I mean, it was a small melt, especially with like paedobaptism, like an understanding of paedobaptism, which I would vehemently probably hold right now, with like an understanding of the covenant and its implications.
Right. So I was gonna say, so like, would you say that, like, I guess the bleeding factor to kind of shoehorning all of these, like, beliefs over time was like this kind of base covenantal, like, because you talked about that like super early on. So I guess, like, kind of like flesh out, like, what is like a covenantal view of like, as opposed to like what, like, just for a point of like clarification kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, most people would know a distinction between Old and New Covenant. Like, that's pretty familiar Christian terms, good old. But when you really take a look at it, it's like in the covenants as the manner that God operates, everything comes to line, because if we really believe in the immutability of God, that He's the same today, tomorrow, and forever, then He acts in the same manners, right? He's consistent. He's hyper consistent. And when you look at the biblical text, we look at Hebrews 11. Every single person in the hall, like the hall of faith is what we call it, like, they were saved not by works, but by faith in the coming Messiah, rather either explicit or implicit amongst particular peoples. And it produced faithfulness in action, and so when we understand that, everything sort of fell into line. It's like when you look at the circumcision of the heart and the act of circumcision, and you pair particular scripture verses like Romans 6 and 1 Peter 3:21 and John 3, and all these things coalesce, and you understand that, well, if circumcision, if the old covenant was by faith, which it was by faith, then circumcision could not have been a work. And if circumcision correlates to baptism, then baptism isn't a work. And this can be understood in, like, very simple terms, is you cannot do anything to save you within either regard, right? Within either respect. And so, like, I can't make water save me. It's impossible for me to do so. Without Christ, I will die, and I will never be risen from the grave. And so when you start, like, understanding these covenantal realities, and the fact that God is consistent with His covenant and His promises, and then you broaden with a sacramental perspective, like, everything just sort of changes and falls into place in the narratives, but also the things that every Christian denomination outside of particular non-denominational groups, Baptists and all these, have been saying forever, just sort of starts to make sense.
So, like, to kind of summarize, like a covenantal, like, understanding is, like, mainly dealing with, like, the interplay between, like, faith, and, like, kind of the dispensation of grace within an agreement is, like, that. Like, this is, like, an awkward articulation because I've never dug into, like, a covenantal understanding, really.
And so
like,
I'd say, so, like, covenant is the interaction. There's so many, and you want to be careful with, like, how you word things here, because the scholarship is, like, really exquisite. And so I'd say, think of it as, like, the general thing is how the manners in which God's redemptive history works itself out, almost.
Okay, so, like, the consistent methods by which God redeems people is, so, like, that's covenantal in the fact that, like, he
does it via his covenant, his promises.
Okay, right. So, like, covenant as, like, this overarching backdrop that, like, we need to find ourselves within.
Yeah.
Because I get, so, like, the point is, like, that the way that we interact with God is not something that we get to define, but that we have to, like, find ourselves in that it's a covenant that's already standing, or, like,
not exactly necessarily. If I understand you correctly, I'd say you enter into covenants with God, right? And so, and those covenants have expectations and benefits, and so you have the establishment of the law with Moses,
right,
in that covenant,
right.
And then you also have the new covenant, which is stricken with the cross, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so entering into the covenant of the cross, how does that happen? Romans 6 is very clear. In the waters of baptism, you were joined to the cross and raised to new life. And if there's nothing more clear about an entrance into some sort of formal thing, then I don't know what is.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, going back to kind of your faith journey, I'm kind of curious how this all came to a head, with maybe tying this back to, like, your family, and how did this like coalesce? Because all of these thoughts were coming to fruition at college. What happened when you came back home?
Yeah, I mean, I had consistent conversations with my parents throughout it all. Unfortunately for my father, he trained me to have answers, and so we butt heads every time, but it's always in good faith. And so it hasn't really. I mean, my dad's still a hardcore Reformed Baptist, and I don't see him necessarily being any. I don't know. I've pushed him on some things, but he's what I'd call pretty classically Reformed also. So, like, real presence isn't necessarily problematic. Now, my mom, there's bigger problems. I mean, this summer they were really, really worried that I was going to become Catholic. Not actually worried. They trust me. But they were like, that was the biggest concern.
Yeah, I get that.
And who knows? That might still be a reality. It might still be a possibility. It's not something that I've completely shut out of my mind.
Wrestle with it.
And I think the sacramental perspective of the world is the clear perspective. It aligns so much of our reality. One, with the work that Christ does and did, and then also the flow. Like I think one big thing is, like, when I started viewing the world more sacramentally, a lot of, like, the conservative arguments that I was hearing consistently started making more sense, particularly around manners such as marriage and unity and all those different things, and just being able to sit and being able to learn and not have this not have to have all the answers, because I don't have all the answers, and being comfortable with that for the first time in my life really was really good. And my parents also respected me every time I said I don't know, because I don't know all the time, and there's certain questions that I just haven't gotten to. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's almost like our God's infinite.
And we have a lifetime to figure them out.
Yeah, and I think that's it's been one of the biggest anxieties, right? Is like you don't want to be not in line with the truth and what is right and what is good. It's my highest desire. But in someone who struggles with obsessive compulsive disorder and scrupulosity, sometimes that's difficult, because like like thoughts of damnation are real sometimes, and like the anxieties that suffer with that. But when you, like we've already said, when your confidence is in Christ, what do you have to lose? It's the best journey ever. And I think these past few years have really been just the beginning of it, which has been really nice. And it's allowed me, because like you come to a point where you're like, is this all there is? And then nope, there's more. There's a lot more. Every time you think there's like, what else is there? There's more. And freshman Gideon would be really surprised that predestination isn't even the most interesting thing out there,
Dude, oh my gosh, yeah. Every like young theology student coming in is always like, oh no, yeah, like I'm so excited to like have this conversation. Like, did we ask, like, we asked one of the upperclassmen one time, I think, like what his view on it was, and he was like, he almost like tossed it off. It was like, oh, whatever, like that's so boring. Like, why are you still talking about this kind of thing? I think at the time, at least for me, I was very much like, what? He doesn't care about this Arminianism versus predestination, like Calvinist thing. Like what? This is like the topic. But like, I think as you go deeper, you kind of like, there is just so much more to explore.
Yeah, I mean, probably my biggest interests right now are Eucharistic thought, Johannine expression, Christology, things like that, and just general analytical, like the joining of philosophical understandings and biblical and historical understandings of text, and really understanding like the implications of particular like books of the Bible on one another, and how we interpret in light of the theology put forth by different authors. For sure. And so I think you have to start somewhere, and I started in a really lucky spot. Yeah. I was very, very blessed with the people, the men who surrounded me, and the women who surrounded me, and were very faithful in their job to build me up. And I was very blessed for the father and mother that I was gifted, because they trained me up in the way that I should go, and they were faithful, and they showed me they really ministered me with the Holy Spirit too, and it's easy to get lost, and I think that's super important in our biblical understandings, especially coming from like someone who's more classically reformed. Is like I went to church with hardcore cessationists, and I was blessed enough to go to Reformed congregations and be able to be completely confident in the fact that the charismata exist, and that God has not abandoned his church and stuff like that. And the Reformed people, that is a complete straw man of their position. They do not believe that the Holy Spirit has abandoned the church. But like, there's just something to it about like, really like, there's an active presence. It's not like, yeah, he's here. It's active.
Like he's doing something.
He's doing something. And some may call me naive for believing that, but I've seen him do stuff. I've seen him work, and it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've seen already in the couple years I've been with you how God's moved in you, and I think this story has said a lot. I mean, your story of faith has been really cool to hear, fleshed out kind of a little bit more. Never got to hear so much at one time for sure. And I think it's hopefully it's a blessing to those who hear, but I know it's been a blessing to Mike and I.
Oh, yeah.
I know you've been a blessing to Mike and I'm really excited to see where you go, and hopefully where this podcast goes.
Yeah,
And
be fun.
yeah.
Cool. All right. That's it. That's a wrap.